Welcome to ACC Student News.
The news students can use. I'm Carl.
And I'm Robert. Here are this week's stories.
After 2 weeks of the trial of the ill-fated Western film Rust Armorer, the verdict is guilty. Hannah Gutierrez Reed was convicted this week of involuntary manslaughter in the death of the film's cinematographer. Sources state that she loaded a live bullet into Alec Baldwin's pistol, which he shot and killed Helena Hutches and seriously wounded the director. She was acquitted on separate charges of tampering with evidence. Gutierrez Reed is the first person to stand trial in 2021 shootings on the film set. She faces up to 18 months in prison and a fine.
The Supreme Court restored Trump to the ballot after Colorado, Illinois, and Maine attempted to prevent his name from appearing on the ballot over the Capitol Hill attack. The Supreme Court unanimously restored Donald Trump to 2024 presidential primary ballots. The reasoning behind this unanimous decision is that states cannot invoke a post-Civil War constitutional provision to keep the presidential candidates from appearing on ballots.
After this week's Super Tuesday primary Republican candidate Nikki Haley is now dropping out of the race after losing in almost every state but Vermont. Only 2 candidates remain: former Republican President Donald Trump and current Democratic President Joe Biden. The two will hit the campaign trail soon to get the votes of the American people. Some states still have not had primaries, but the only real option that remains are Joe Biden or Trump. The general election in November will be a rematch of the 2020 presidential election.
Daylight saving time begins in the early hours of Sunday, March 10th, which will make our days brighter and longer. Daylight savings in the U.S. always starts on the second Sunday of March, where they turn the clock up an hour, and the first Sunday of November, where the clock turns back, according to the Uniform Time Act that was passed in 1966.
The House of Representatives will vote on a legislation for the popular app TikTok, which has about 170 million U.S. users. The legislation will give China's ByteDance 6 months to either divest the app or have the app banned in the U.S. if a committee approves the measures. While the House voted on a new bipartisan bill, 50-0, which would block social media applications controlled by the U.S. adversaries and would deem a national security threat to users from operating in the country.
A mass grave with over 1,000 bodies was found at a site in southern Germany. The bodies are dated to be around the late 1400s to the early 1600s. The archaeologists said that 8 plague pits were identified containing several hundred bodies. Along with the bodies, they found pottery and coins that date back even further. These bodies have many trace amounts of an old plague that rid the earth many years ago.
Israel and Hamas have been unable to reach a ceasefire deal that would be able to halt the war for 6 weeks. This in turn would allow the exchange of hostages and get aid and supplies to the people living in and around Gaza. Israel has been stalling for weeks, and the U.S. had been urging both sides to get a deal done before the month of Ramadan begins in the coming weeks. So the death toll is around 30,000 people in total from attacks, disease, and starvation. U.S. has sets up temporary port in Gaza's coast for aid delivery. The temporary port will increase the amount of humanitarian assistance by Palestinians by hundreds of additional truckloads per day, officials say. President Biden added that no U.S. troops would land in Gaza. The UK suggests that it would work with the U.S. to set up a sea corridor, Gaza has no deep water ports, so the U.S. has been looking for ways to get shiploads of aid urgently for the incoming weeks.
Haiti's government has declared emergency after the country was recently overrun by gangs. The gangs started out their reign of terror with a mass jailbreak that broke out over 4,000 inmates across the country. The reason for the gang's sudden takeover is because of their prime minister. The gang has stated that unless the current prime minister resigns, chaos will proceed to ensue throughout the country, with even civil war being threatened. There has been no response, unfortunately leaving the possibility of civil war on the table.
That's all we have for this week. I'm Carl.
And I'm Robert. Make sure to check out the rest of our videos on YouTube.
And follow us at ACC TV Hammond.